Hey everybody, today is Monday, October 23rd, 2023. Coming up on the show today, from Ahsoka, editor Dana E. Glauberman.
You know, there's different challenges along the way with anything that we work on, whether we are fans of certain characters or certain movies or franchises or not. We're still hired to tell a good story, and I think we're all storytellers in our own right, and we can bring that to the table.
Editor James D. Wilcox.
When I first started, I had no idea I would ever get the opportunity to work on Star Wars. I mean, that's the joy, the dream for many editors.
And editor Rosanne Tan.
We're storytellers, but I think as far as the Star Wars universe, I think the three of us can agree that we are just not the most knowledgeable in the Star Wars universe, I think. But whatever's important for our show, we would know.
Yes, all that and more on this edition of The Rough Cut. Okay, hello and welcome everybody. Welcome to this thing I call The Rough Cut. You can feel free to call it whatever you like. I'm not sensitive. Well, that's not true. I probably am. That's why it means so much that you come visit each week so we can talk about editing and film and TV making and meet some really cool people together. And we certainly have some cool people to meet or to re-meet today from the Star Wars TV series Ahsoka, starting with Star Wars on Disney Plus veteran Dana E. Glauberman. In case you're wondering, the E stands for Excellent Editor. Dana is making her fourth appearance on the podcast. She's been on previously to talk about her work on Ghostbusters Afterlife and also The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett. So fourth appearance for Dana on the podcast and third Star Wars series for her as well. As for our other two guests, they are new to the Star Wars galaxy, but also familiar faces, or voices anyway, on the podcast. James D. Wilcox is here. The D stands for Damn, he's a good editor. James has been on the show twice prior to today, both times to talk about projects he's done with director Ron Howard, and that would be Hillbilly Elegy and 13 Lives. Finally, we have Rosanne Tan. It seems Rosie doesn't travel with a middle initial, so we're going to have to give her one. How about Rosanne I. Tan? As in, I can't believe I agreed to talk to this putz for a fourth time. No, Rosie would never say that. She's too nice. She might think it, but no matter. What matters is that Rosie has come on the show previously to talk about her work on the series Homecoming, as well as two Marvel series, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier and Hawkeye. I have always had a lot of fun talking to these three, and today will be no exception. Now, as I often do, or I guess I should say as I often don't do, when we're talking about these big franchises, I don't bother to do too much explanation or exposition. I think Star Wars is largely understood, even if the character Ahsoka Tano might be new to you. Rather, I thought we should get right down to the business of meeting today's guests. But before we do, let's do a little business about the music business, specifically production audio. More specifically, our sponsor, Extreme Music. They provide a fully rights-cleared catalog of the best production music out there. Music created by A-list musicians, composers, and producers. Names like Mark Isham, John Powell, Paul Oakenfold, Michael Giacchino. Don't know about you. Those are people I'd like on my movie. And you can make that happen by going to extrememusic.com and searching their catalog with keywords like tempo, genre, composer, and any other little hints you want to give them. Not only will they give you back just what you need, you can customize the instrumentation. You can choose different track lengths. You can even use their amazing reference track feature to give them a track so they can find you ones just like it. How's that for a Jedi mind trick? These are the tracks you're looking for. All of that stuff, as well as the licensing, can be done online, or they have actual human beings that you can talk to help you work through it. So the next time you have a story to tell, prequel, sequel, series, or otherwise, make sure to visit extrememusic.com. Alrighty, showtime. It's my favorite time, right after nap time, but that can wait. For now, it's time to meet Ahsoka editors Dana Glauberman, James Wilcox, and Rosanne Tan.
Fucking bananas, excuse my French.
First F word of the day.
There will be many more.
Can you delete that?
Yeah, sure.
Take two.
Take two. Jinx. Sorry, I'm starting this over because you're going to cut all that out.
Maybe.
You're throwing me for the loop here, Matt.
Can you feel the fear in us, Matt?
I think you're all doing great, and you're going to do even better as we move forward. I know that.
And it's going to be even better after you cut it.
Well, we'll see. The first thing you see when you watch Ahsoka is something very familiar, but also very different. For the first time in a Star Wars TV series, We do see that familiar opening crawl from the features, but instead of being in yellow and crawling backwards into Z space, it's red and just scrolls on a normal 2D plane, which prompted me to wonder the following, Dana. This is now your third Star Wars series, beginning with The Mandalorian and then the Book of Boba Fett. Since Dave Filoni was behind all of these, did he say anything specific, or even perhaps vague, to you about how he wanted Ahsoka to either be different or similar to the series that have come before it?
Honestly, no. I don't remember having any conversations with him about that specifically. You know, the crawl is something really interesting that Dave came up with while we were in the cutting room, I think. I'm sure he had it in his mind long before because he's brilliant that way. But we really tried to have the same kind of feel as the features with that crawl. But I believe the traditional 3D crawl that kind of goes away from camera is saved for the features. And so the 2D crawl that just crawls from the bottom up is where we landed.
So by this point, you and Dave just have this understanding. You don't even have to talk.
Yeah, exactly.
Rosie, you are the only one, I believe, with both Lucasfilm and Marvel experience, at least in terms of the TV series, both being Disney Plus properties. Even though they are both under the Disney banner, Lucasfilm and Marvel, very different studios. How would you compare and contrast the workflow and the process of working on a Marvel series like Hawkeye versus Ahsoka?
Well, I obviously can only speak to the projects I work on. So for Ahsoka, we did a lot more prep. On the Marvel side, the editors were brought on after Previs was done. We were brought on just right before production. Whereas Ahsoka, I started in January, so it was about 5 months prior to production, and we were doing a lot of prep work. And being a part of virtual boarding with the directors, with Dave, with John, with the DPs, that's a whole new experience for me. Just so much prep work. And it was great to see how everything kind of started on script level. And then we built every episode with our previs, and we get to see that kind of come alive in a full sequence. Marvel, we did previs, but it was cut by somebody else, and it was only big action sequences. But then on the Marvel side, we did a lot of post-viz, which was, after things are shot, we would send sequences out to third floor, then we work with third floor that way, and we work with third floor on Ahsoka for previs stuff. So there's different workflows, and I quite enjoy both of them. But yeah, the prep work here was pretty great.
James D. Wilcox, are you up for a little Big Game James trivia?
I am, always.
James always gets the fun questions.
He does. Well, only he can answer this one because it's about him. Your first credit, believe it or not, is something called Science Fiction, A Journey into the Unknown. Which is ironic because ever since you've barely cut any sci-fi or superhero stuff. You were recognized for dramatic, largely dialogue-driven shows. So knowing that, tell me about getting this job and the things from your credits or your experience that you think might have played into why they wanted you for part of Ahsoka.
That's an interesting question because when I first started, I had no idea I would ever get the opportunity to work on Star Wars. I mean, that's the joy, the dream for many editors. But that first science fiction show was a reality-based show. And it was a clip show that went ultimately to the Radio and Science Television Museum. And it was interesting because I've always had an interest in science fiction as a kid, but I hadn't been able to sustain that interest in my career. And I went away and I did a lot of other things along the way, always trying to grow and learn and do more in comedy and other dramas and occasionally features. And I have to tell you, Matt, like every show that I've ever worked on, I always find like that experience pays itself forward. So I started really in comedy after I did that science fiction journey of history into the science fiction show. And then I went into drama and all kinds of procedurals and stuff that was more action based. And then when I was in London finishing up 13 Lives, I got a call that Lucas had some interest in me from my agent at UTA. I got a call that Lucas had interest in me and talking to me about Star Wars. And I was like, let's set that up right away because I'd love to work on it.
I have a little James Wilcox trivia. James, who did you see along the way that you worked with again on Ahsoka?
Oh, Kevin Kiner. Yeah, Kevin Kiner and I had worked together like almost a decade ago on Hawaii Five-0. And I guess in our disconnection and different paths in our career, he went towards Rebels and Clone Wars. And I had not any idea what he was doing after that. And then I went on and started doing more premium streaming shows and ultimately features. And then we came back together on this, and it was lovely to work with him again and see the growth that he's had in his career and how much Dave Filoni really relies on him. It was a pretty special experience.
I bet it was. You know, Dana, I'm sure they feel like family to you by now, but this is a relatively new crew to you. For the past 2 Star Wars series you've done, it was Dylan Furshine and Jeff Siebenek and Andrew Eisen alongside of you. Being the veteran of the crew for the Lucasfilm universe, do you take it upon yourself to do anything in particular to sort of help onboard them or help acclimate them to the workflow that you're probably pretty used to by now?
I think we had some early conversations. Rosie came on before James. And so when Rosie came on, we had a lot of conversations about previs and the process, but she knew about the process, and any kind of questions that either Rosie or James had, we all kind of talked about. But still working from home, we were distanced from each other a little bit too much, but we had plenty of meetings and conversations along the way. And I was able to help out anywhere that I could, but I absolutely love working with Rosie and James. It's been such a fun ride on this show, and constantly bouncing ideas off of each other and looking at each other's work when we can. We didn't have access to each other's episodes, so it was a little bit more difficult in that respect.
When you started, Rosie, I'm sure Dana gave you what she could at that point to help you get going. And then when I started, Rosie gave me in turn what she could give me to help me get going. Because it was quite a different experience, as Rosie talked about earlier, with previs and the VFX meetings and the workflow of it all, and just what the expectation and just getting to know the names and faces. Because when I came in, they were fully up to speed. And so I would hear, oh, Richard Bluff will do this and this person will do that. And so I didn't know exactly, because we didn't ever have like a contact sheet that says, this is this person, this is the supervisor for this is the person for this. And you grow to learn it quickly, but it was a great help from whatever Rosie was able to give me to help me get settled into my workflow, and whatever Dana was able to pass on to Rosie. And Rosie, thank you again for that.
Oh, no, you're welcome. And it was great because I think at the beginning, we were all just Zoom. It was just kind of getting the hang of things when I first signed on, talking to the assistants, because we had to do a lot of radio cuts for the different episodes. And then also, I think Dana at the beginning was to 2 of us just helping each other out, I think, with the previs, because it was literally the train started rolling. So we were just helping each other out. And before James started, I was actually helping out on one of the episodes that he took on as the actual show, but I was helping with the previs. So again, it was a lot of teamwork, just communicating and helping each other out.
Well, on the other side of that coin, aside from Dana helping you both out, helping yourselves out, I mean, this is work that's built on Star Wars Rebels and Clone Wars. Do you take it upon yourselves, because it is such a deep, complex universe in terms of these characters and their backstories? Do you go back and watch those series or shows and take notes?
Well, I think the 3 of us can agree that we are just not the most knowledgeable in the Star Wars universe. I think, right, James?
I
right,
second
Dana?
that. I second that.
We're storytellers, but I think as far as the Star Wars universe, I've watched the movies growing up, and I would watch whatever new thing that would come out. I watched The Mandalorian, which I really liked. I can't say that I would know exactly where that background of that one character is. However, if, for example, we were on a call with Dave and Dave would give out things for us to kind of research on, for example, in episode 5, he would talk about Kagemusha or Akira Kurosawa and all his movies, I would definitely do the research for that and kind of watch the movies prior to starting episode 5. But as far as, I wouldn't know what creature would be called in this movie or that movie or what planet. I'm still learning that stuff.
I am too.
Yeah, whatever's important for our show, we would know.
And like you said, Rosie, we are storytellers. So I think, there's different challenges along the way with anything that we work on, whether we are fans of certain characters or certain movies or franchises or not. We're still hired to tell a good story. And I think we're all storytellers in our own right, and we could bring that to the table.
Yeah. When I was in London, I got a bit of a cheat code from Jude Babcock about which episodes that were going to be critical to watch of Clone Wars and Rebels. And then my son, who had been following the series as well, when I had questions about it, I would ask him. So I would work my 6 days a week on 13 Lives and then come home on the weekends and cram as much as I could. But when I was interviewed, I was very candid. I'm sure as Rosie and Dana were, and Dana, they were already familiar with you as a storyteller. but this was my first dip into Lucasfilm. And I thought, I was very clear about what I can offer you on balance is the storytelling. Because I went to Ron Howard, who had done Solo with him, and I said, Ron, I think I'm going to take this job, and I'm a little concerned that I may not know as much as I need to. And he goes, don't worry about it. They don't expect you to have an encyclopedic knowledge of the entire Star Wars catalog. What they want for you are your instincts, your storytelling ability. And on balance, it works really, really well so that we are not too beholden to anything that's going on, where it has to make sense to us first. And we represent a certain amount of the audience who would not have seen all the previous episodes of Clone Wars or Rebels. And so in that perspective, we are able to have newcomers come on board and understand the fundamentals of the drama that we're trying to tell. And Dave Filoni trusted us all with his characters.
So I've done interviews on Mandalorian, Book of Boba Fett, Obi-Wan. Didn't occur to me until now that you really only ever have one set. You're in the volume, you're in the Stagecraft virtual set. So I would assume now that you couldn't really work on more than one episode at a time. But there was a recent interview with Rosario Dawson where she talked about, we filmed in tandem the whole time. It was a 6-month shoot, and it probably would have been a year had we not had 2 different crews filming multiple different episodes at the same time. So you do actually have 2 crews working together somehow with that one set. How does that work, and how does that affect you as editors?
It's a lot of planning. I think that's why there's so much prep involved prior to shooting. Getting all the episodes down, getting the previs kind of laid out, and then they're able to plan. For example, during production, when we were on set, we were upstairs, and it was kind of like whenever they needed us, we could come down. They had tandem sets going, and I think that's great because I would be getting dailies on a different day. Dana would be getting dailies a different day, or James. And we're kind of just focused on our episodes, and we're just getting things done to our different deadlines.
And along those lines, you've touched on prep a lot so far, Rosie, which is great. And I just want to stress the fact that we're essentially cutting these episodes 3 times. Each episode is cut 3 times. The previs is cut, and they're planning the backgrounds because a lot of preparations go into, and a lot of planning goes into what's going to go on the volume wall. So we have to cut previs, and then we cut during production, and then we're working with the directors and producers and Dave. So we're basically cutting each episode at least 3 times in order to facilitate all of that.
And I would say there's even a 4th pass that we do before we even get to previs, because we have table reads that come in from the cast.
That's true.
We have to do that radio cut where you can kind of get a sense of the rhythm and the dynamics of what's going on with the actors and the characters. And then we're able to give that over to previs so they have something to actually work towards, or else they are just kind of guessing what they're doing. If you add that pass in as well, it's like a 4th pass.
That's very true.
How do you feel about talking about some of the scenes from the series? You have to say yes.
Of course.
A staple of many Star Wars films and shows is, of course, the lightsaber duels. But not all duels are created equally. Dana, I'd like to compare and contrast a couple that you did. In episode 1, you have Sabine Wren and Shin Hati, 2 less experienced fighters with the lightsaber. So it almost seems like the way you cut it was looser with more wides, and you could sort of feel that they were less experienced fighters, as opposed to a duel you did between Ahsoka and Baylan Skoll. Faster cuts, more angles. And that is what you would kind of expect, as your cuts help to make it look more real, more dangerous, to cover up any stunt doubles that came in to do the flips and all that kind of stuff. So just tell me about those 2 different approaches where Sabine and Shin, they're not Jedi masters. They're just starting out. I'm going to take a different approach to how I cut them than I would for Ahsoka and Baylan.
Well, episode 1 was directed by Dave Filoni. Episode 4, which has the Ahsoka Baylan fight, was directed by Peter Ramsey. So the coverage that I had was drastically different as well. Both were shot by Eric Steelberg, but the angles and stuff that I had to work with were much different from each other. And so I take what's given to me and go off of that. The choreography of everything was spot on, spectacular, and all the actors and stunt doubles trained like crazy to give us what we needed. I'll answer the Ahsoka Baylan first. Baylan, it's so sad to think that he's not here with us anymore. Balin is such a force of nature, and his choreography was much more powerful. And the coverage that I had showed all of that. Whereas the Shin Sabine lightsaber fight at the end of episode 1 was a little bit less so. So a lot of it was planned during the previs stage. So I kind of followed along with that. However, I was able to throw in a couple of different angles, and working with Dave, my first cut was probably a lot different than how it ended up, because they were much slower in their performances and we had to speed things up a little bit through little tricks of the trade of visual effects or cutting out frames or whatnot. But they gave me what I needed to actually put on screen what we have.
Besides the lightsaber duels, as far as set pieces go, Star Wars also has its dogfights in space, but every now and then it has a great chase sequence. You have the speeder bikes in The Empire Strikes Back, or Anakin's pod race in The Phantom Menace. Rosie, in episode 7, you get to have a lot of fun with a sequence where Ezra and Sabine are running with the Nodes. They're like walking turtles that sound like Jawas and act like Ewoks. The Nodes and Ezra and Sabine are being chased by bandits. Like any chase, within that chase, you have beats. Either they're bits of comedic or expository dialogue, or an insert of a specific bit of action between characters. So how do you go about building that sequence? Do you start with those beats that I mentioned and then fill in with the wides, or do you take a more linear approach from the beginning to the end of that chase?
You think about what the cause and effect is, and Dave is always about cause and effect. So in previs, we had the shots, so you were trying to work, this bandit's chasing after them, and now are they going to shoot at the noties? Who's going to shoot first? So kind of planning it out and laying it out that way. A lot of times, I think when the dailies came in, literally it's just the pod and the blue screen, and you would basically kind of just split screen it and do the sound design, tell the story just to see how everything is laid out. And then insert the moments where Ezra and Sabine had their one line or two lines. And then again, focus on the cause and effect. And then in between that, before we get any shots from VFX or the vendors, we basically just lay in the stuff from the previs. That's why the previs stuff for big chases like that is so important to have, just because obviously I can't create a turtle sitting on a pod. So we need those shots and we need to put that in. And again, we're temping sound design and music and then showing passes to the director and also Dave. So usually that's how sequences like that work.
Dana mentioned how powerful Balin's character is, and it's true. There's a lot of conflict with that character. When the Great Mothers imprison Sabine in episode 6, she protests to Balin that, hey, we had a deal. And his reaction shot shows that he has regret about reneging on that deal. And then in the next scene, Balin and Shin have an extended discussion about his past and his experience with the Jedi being raised at the temple. Can you tell me about managing how you manage giving the audience too much or too little with this character, because he is so mysterious?
Ray made excellent choices. I'll just start there. And so the dailies that I got, there was an emotional complexity to what he did with Balin that I never really expected. Because sometimes when you're cutting stories that have villains and heroes, they can be very one-sided. And it's very clear the villain does this, the hero does that. And with him, there was a complexity and integrity and a struggle internally that almost felt in some ways like a religious quest of sort, that he was struggling internally in what his mission was in life, the greater calling, and how to find that and how to get there. And I think it was something that was just so emotional. He could never quite explain that to Shin in a way that she would believe it. So he knew what he was after, and she just had to kind of trust him. And I think the focal point of that trust became, are you going to honor what you told Sabine? And we as the audience never knew what he was going to do, which made his character so fantastic. There was never a predictability to his journey and what he intended to do and what his means to an end was. You got the sense that every one of those characters, by the time they hit Peridia, each one of them had their own agenda that was not to be revealed until later episodes or season 2 or what have you. And I think that uncertainty is really what made those characters much more complex and interesting.
I did say I wanted to follow up on talking about Dave Filoni and working with him as a director. I believe just Dana and Rosie were able to work with Dave as a director. So I guess this question is for you. Having him in the chair with you, knowing that he's writer and then director for the episodes that you're working on, does that make it more efficient or just a faster path to where you want to get to because he has the history and can be that much more helpful in understanding the tone because he kind of is the wellspring that all this stuff comes from.
I mean, first of all, he created Ahsoka with George Lucas, so he knows exactly what their agendas are and where everything is and how everything is laid out. And he's also an encyclopedia of Star Wars. I think he knows what he wants. And of course, when we're working with him, we try different things and we show him a scene with how it's temp and everything. But it's great to just show him because basically he's the person that's ultimately going to decide how it's going to be.
It's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, he is an encyclopedia of Star Wars. And it was like I was in Star Wars school with him because you get little bits of information every single day. He wrote all 8 episodes of Ahsoka. He knew exactly what he wanted. It's a true collaboration of us and him and everybody else involved. And that's part of the reason why I absolutely love working with him. He's fun. He gives us a hard time. He jokes around, but he also has a clear vision of what he wants the show to be.
And Matt, while he's clear, he's not closed. He let us take some bold swings on showing him alternate cuts for story as we understood it for people who are trying to relate to this material who aren't the hardest core of the fans. Because you want to hit all levels of fandom and introduce new people to the series so dramatically. He would allow us to do things that, whether they were small trims or scene deletions or what have you, if we saw it differently, there was never an objection to us being able to present another version.
100%.
It's wonderful, his balance of collaboration that way. He's a good leader, but he's also a great listener for what it is that we felt as storytellers that we'd like to see him take another swing or another look at the way we think a scene or a beat could go. And you'd have to do it early enough because obviously these shots are all designed. They have a lot of visual effects involved. And so if you had an idea, you needed to speak on it early while there was still time to consider that idea and have it move forward with the visual effects department.
Yeah, with episode 5, the title is Shadow Warrior, which stands for Kagemusha. It's basically Akira Kurosawa's work, and that's his inspiration. I remember getting that episode, and I was kind of nervous because there was a lot of dream sequences and
no pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. And I knew it was, and it was going to be Dave directing. So I did a lot of research, downloading temp music. Before we even get to Kevin Kiner, we do a lot of temp music and sound design and everything just to present our cuts. And it was a lot of pressure, and I wanted to do a good job. So I watched everything of Akira Kurosawa and just to see where the inspiration would come from and just try different things. I know it's not cutty, so it's just trying different angles and seeing how samurais would be in Kurosawa movies and just see where the inspirations are. So it was really scary at first, but then it was so much fun once I was able to present to him and, then I saw that he liked it. It's like, oh, okay, great.
You can work another day.
Yeah, I can work another day. But it's always like that, whenever we present something, because we put so much work into it and so much time, and we just want it to be good. And it's always nerve-wracking at first.
Yeah, showing a first cut is never fun.
No.
The visuals often get the attention when it comes to Star Wars and other sci-fi franchises. But I think with Star Wars, really the signature of the franchise is the sound. James, in episode 6, I thought you got to do a lot of fun sound design stuff. And in doing that, you're building on the work that the Godfather, Ben Burtt, did, but you're also creating a new language and adding to that and making new sounds. Things like the Great Mother's voices, Enoch and the Night Trooper voices. The Bandits had this almost Tusken Raider sound. So for you doing sound design and all those different things, are you drawing from the Ben Burtt library and then modifying it? Or are you creating things out of whole cloth? How does that work?
It's a combination when we're sound designing from what we are able to use from the library and what's new that we don't want it to feel too similar to what's been used in the library. Because each one of these shows, it's a brand new series, live action Ahsoka. So you want it to have its own opportunity to come to life on its own unique signature and sound. And I know like the Night Sisters, there was that sort of echoey kind of, they spoke in unison with this whispery, floaty kind of thing that I didn't remember that as much when I watched Rebels and Clone Wars and stuff. But I had watched Dune recently when I was over in London, and the Bene Gesserit kind of had that sort of speaking in that similar fashion. So I thought, okay, well, while we're doing that, you're never going to get that right until you get Lucas Sound or Sky Sound to really take over. And then in terms of like, let's say Captain Enoch, we went through multiple versions of what that would sound like in the end that we settled on. So we had the actor come in and do his thing, and then I would send it off to Matt Wood, and he'd give us back maybe 5 or 6 examples of this is what Enoch could sound like. Then I'd cut them all in on different tracks, and then I would present them to Dave, and Dave would say, okay, we can get rid of 2. We'll keep 3 and 5. And from there, we would go forward. And then near the final mix, we would just choose one. And mostly that was Dave's decision, because I felt like if we get it down to 2 or 3 choices, those 2 or 3 choices are solid. But it's his preference as to what it's going to sound like, because that's going to be the foundation for going forward. So yeah, episode 6, because it was a reintroduction in many ways, almost like a reset, a second pilot in the middle of the series, because you literally are world building and you're introducing the Noti and you're introducing Howlers and Grand Admiral Thrawn's appearance. And it was lots of opportunity there to kind of reset and introduce the planet and all the things that were new and unique to Star Wars, to just freshen it up. That was a lot of fun, just finding and discovering those voices. And yeah, there was some drawing from that in the Tusken Raiders. As a matter of fact, Dave actually said with the bandits, let's make them sound somewhat like the Tusken Raiders. So that was good enough to get us through his cut and then forward it over to Matt Wood, and we could really nail in the final mix what those characters and creatures should sound like.
Yeah, the sound design part was a lot of fun when we get to do it on our side. But then to actually, when we get to see it with Sky Sound, and, you know, this is kudos to Bonnie Wild, Matt Wood, and David Accord and their team for doing amazing sound. And these guys have a relationship with Dave Filoni because they've worked together on previous Star Wars projects. So they know exactly what to, you know, suggest or pull from. So to see them kind of work and see it come alive, it's pretty incredible. You get the chills because, you know, there are things that we can probably pull from or take from, but no, it's going to sound better once Sky Sound takes their pass.
Dana, by this point, you would think I've asked you every question I could about Star Wars, but I don't think I've asked you this one before. I try to make sure to ask editors this. I believe Dave Filoni got to be Chopper the droid. That was his voice work.
Yes.
Are any of your voices in the series?
My voice has not been used in any of the Star Wars. They've been in a couple of the other movies that I've worked on, but so far, not yet. Hopefully sometime soon.
I did sneak in a temp voice that Dave asked me to do, and then he hated it later on and gave me grief over it. It was the Tusken Raider scene when Sabine is fighting those bandits on Peridia. And there was just a few lines that he had written there, and they were just guttural utterances of things and just one-word responses. And then I cut it in and I processed it to try and not have it sound like my very distinct voice. And then he heard that and he goes, back up for a second. And I go, okay, here it is. It's coming. How heavy is it? How heavy is the dump truck going to be? And like, he just gave me such grief on it. And then eventually I just took it out and I was like, okay, Matt Wood and Bonnie and those guys, David Accord, they'll take care of it. But for right now, I'm going to just remove myself from the process. And Dave loved giving us a lot of grief because once he really got comfortable with us all, it was a lot of fun working with him, really a lot of fun to work with him. And the fact that he and I are both from Pittsburgh, we were instant fast friends and colleagues.
Didn't you have to stop at some point wearing your Pittsburgh sweatshirts?
Yeah, because in our VFX meetings, he would get derailed and we would talk about these things that are very local to Pittsburgh. And you could see everyone else on the Zoom just kind of fading away. And then I would just stop talking because I'd let him finish the conversation because no one's going to tell Dave, like, okay, let's move on. But they're giving me the stink eye, like, you should stop talking about Pittsburgh. Then he will stop talking about Pittsburgh. Then we can have our meeting.
Going back to the voice thing, temp-wise, it's been removed for the final product, but I didn't want to hear myself when we're actually doing the temp cuts because I'm just not a fan of my own voice.
Same.
But we did do a lot of noties. So, for example, my assistant editor, Caroline Wang, was a notee. Dana's assistant editor, John Ott, was a notee. I think everybody kind of helped out. You know, we were pretty good about the, ow, you know, that kind of a thing. But my God, I'm glad we took it all out because Matt Wood and everybody put the proper sounds for how a notee would be. But for temp, I heard myself. I'm like, all right, I'm okay being a notee for now. Just throwing a rock.
For now, not permanent.
No. And then I didn't want to say anything because, yeah, Dave would probably give me grief and take it out, you know, or something like that. But
yeah.
And Rosie, you did give me a temp once of one of the witches.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
I did.
James, could you send that over?
Rosie gave me a temp one time for one of the witches, and we were able to cut that in. And because we're also like, I don't know, hypersensitive to our own voices, oftentimes we would ask people around the office to just, and some of the stand-ins would give us temp ADR. It would work quite well. And then occasionally you get one that they had no context for, and you just go, okay, how do I tell this person who's being very helpful that that's not the help we need?
Yeah. There was plenty of that going on.
Yeah, I remember that so well.
While we're still talking about sound design, I don't think I counted a single Wilhelm scream. Am I slipping and I missed one, or did you decide to give Wilhelm a break for once?
Oh, I don't like to use that.
In episode 4, we may have taken it out for the final, but it was in there for a long time when Sabine and Ahsoka come running down into the field to have the fight with the guards. There's one where Ahsoka uses the Force to pull a guard over and then pull him back. I'm pretty sure we had the scream in that. And I don't think we kept it in for the final, but it was carried over for a long time.
I don't like to use it, but I sometimes would just, I think Caroline Wang, my assistant, knows how much I care about the sound. So a lot of times I would just have her kind of do her temp ADR. We would kind of do a lot of like grunts, efforts, and screams. And then I think we would kind of rope in John, who is really great at temp voices. I think he temped in a lot of stuff for us. And I same with James, right? Augustine would help out too. So we were kind of a team, kind of doing everybody kind of helping out where we need to. But I think that's the fun part, to kind of just put it in the background, record screams in your house since we're all at home. And
everybody works a little bit differently. I rely on my assistants to do all the sound work because I want to focus on story and performance, and not that the other editors don't, because they do a great job with that too. But I put all of my time into that, and I keep my assistants involved with sometimes throwing them a bone and allowing them to cut. John Ott was fantastic, a huge help because he knows Star Wars. He was my assistant on this, but I also gave him a lot because I was focusing a lot on the pilot with Dave. I was falling a little behind on episode 4. So he ended up cutting a lot of stuff for episode 4, and he got additional editing credit for that episode, which was great. But yeah, I rely on my assistants to do all of the sound work, and I'll do tweaks here and there, but early first pass sound work, I give it to them.
We just had a great crew.
All around.
Our assistants, we were always talking, all around. I mean, from Caroline to John to Augustine, and then also our VFX editors. There's Richard Sanchez, Steve Jacks, Michael Struck, Chris Hurd. I think the whole team, every time that we need all hands on deck, everybody was ready to jump on board. That's the great thing. Even on the other side, we don't really deal with the VFX team side. There's so many assistants on that side, so many people. Just this project is so big that you kind of have a great team all around.
The thing with the Wilhelm scream is it's kind of playful. And the thing you notice about Ahsoka is, at least compared to Mando, is the tone is a little darker. But there is a scene that I felt was a bit of an outlier in a good way, and that's sort of the comedic beat of introducing Sabine Wren. The music is a little playful. The scene is a little jokey. It's a little awkward, like, where is she? And then you introduce the character and you have this sort of rock track playing when we see her outrunning the space cops. It's a very different scene tonally than I think the rest of the series. And I just wanted to know, Dana, in working on that, are you thinking about how far can I go with this to make it a little broader, a little funnier than maybe the rest of the series is?
Dave actually had a very clear vision of how he wanted that scene to play. And that is essentially shot for shot how we cut it in previs. Oh my God, what was the name of the song that we used originally during previs?
Magic Carpet Ride?
Yes, we cut it originally to Magic Carpet Ride. And it was so hard to get that out of our mind. When we passed it on to Kevin, he was like, how am I going to score this? Because that's such an iconic song. But he ended up collaborating with Ludwig and Dina Kiner and Kevin.
And Sean.
And Sean, thank you. They brought on another team to do the vocals for that. And so to answer your question, it's not really answering your question, but Dave was very clear on how he wanted that scene to play. And that was one of the first ones that we finished. And it carried on from previs to the final.
So when you're temping for this show, really this is for any Star Wars show, being very selective about what you use. I mean, there are some themes and some motifs that are now legendary within the Star Wars universe. And I just wonder, for the three of you, do you try and lean into something like that? When I'm temping, maybe I want to use something from John Williams or something evocative of Star Wars, or I specifically want to stay away from that. Which way do you go with that?
I mean, for me, I know what we're doing with those scenes and the homage to it. Like in episode 3, the space battle is very similar to A New Hope, the trench run. I'll take a listen to it to see if it plays into what we're currently working on. But again, it's that mix of, we want the birth of a new show and new characters and new action and new dialogue and scenes to really come alive on their own. So I tended to stay away from the scores from some of the older films. I mean, sometimes I could use something that was less featured, that was more just underscore. But if it was a major moment, I usually tried to stay away from it. And I tried it, and Dave would say, well, let's not use that. I mean, because that's what your instincts would suggest, right? It's 1-to-1 from the prequels or what have you. So you may want to try and temp with that because it makes sense. But then sometimes I would cut it in and he goes, I don't really want to use that. Let's root around for something else. In episode 6, A Galaxy Far, Far Away, that episode, I tried something there that was an homage and it just didn't feel right. And then finally, Dave said, hey, let's go ahead, because the scene's working. Let's go ahead and try a different piece of temp in there. And I came up with something else that seemed to be the perfect tone and button. And then we had conversation later with Kevin Kiner and we nailed down what it was that we needed to do. And I think we had some discussion in episode 8 when Dana and I were working on it about the use of the Force theme, when it would be most potent to use it. And so we came up with a place to use it and it worked well there. I mean, look, the thing is, we're not trying to run away from anything that was pre-established. We want to have fun. And just to go back to what we were talking about earlier, the speeder bike chase, I remember when I started early on, Dave did quote George and said, listen, George always said that the Star Wars universe has its own character and everything. But at the end of the day, make it fun. Just make sure it's also fun. So with that in mind, you'd cut something, you want to go, yeah, whether it's heart pounding or it's a cheerful moment or whatever it is, you really want to make sure that the audience is enjoying the material as well.
I agree with James on that. I love temping music, and I would basically try different things. I think I even used, in episode 5, I was temping with Tori Takamatsu's movie Rising Sun. There are a lot of drums in there, so I was experimenting with that. So I didn't necessarily think of Star Wars. I kind of stayed away. And ultimately it did happen where Dave, having a conversation with Kevin Kiner, Dina, and Sean, then they ultimately would pick moments where they would bring back the John Williams Star Wars stuff. But for me anyways, and James, it seems like we were doing our own temping and just, when Dave saw it, if he didn't like something, he would tell us and then we would try something else. But, I was temping with Johan Johansson or Hans Zimmer or just different things of like what felt right for the scene. And every scene is different. Every episode's different. So it's kind of just whatever felt right for the episode.
And sometimes if Dave didn't like what we had put in, he had something specific to use. So he would suggest a cue from a completely different movie or something that he would be listening to while he was writing that gave him inspiration. So we would put that in instead.
And by the way, Matt, Dave had a couple misfires too. Okay.
It's not possible.
I mean, look, it's the creative process, right? So you try, and then that brings you closer to what not to do, if nothing else. And, you start dialing it in from there. So that's just part of his openness to have an idea, have a plan, but be flexible.
And there's no bad idea.
There is no try, James. There is only do. Star Wars movies and shows, TV shows can get a little crazy in a very good way with intercutting. You can have up to 3 scenes playing out at the same time, like in episode 7, Rosie, the one you did. You've got Ezra and Sabine fighting off Shin and the bandits at the same time as Ahsoka's dueling with Baylan, and then you have Thrawn and Morgan watching the battle from the ship.
And you have Hu Yang flying the T6.
Inevitably, one of those scenes ends and its characters transition into one of the other scenes, like Ahsoka getting away from Baylan and joining Ezra and Sabine in their fight. I mean, you can see where I'm going with this. And, the finale, same thing. You've got Ahsoka dueling with Morgan and then Sabine and Ezra trying to stop Thrawn from escaping. It's a frenetic pace, and it's so much to manage for an editor. I would just like to know what your approach is to that. Do you cut each of those sub-scenes as its own sequence and then cut the sequences together? Or do you, I'll use the term I used before when asking Rosie about the chase scenes, take a linear approach where you just build from beginning to end?
Well, I'll answer for episode 2. We had a lot of big intercuts when Ahsoka was fighting Merrick and then also coming back to Hera and Chopper 2. 5 is a little bit different. 5 is more of a dream. And then 7, we have a lot back and forth. I think for me, anyways, when Ezra and Sabine are fighting and then before we cut back to Baylan, I cut that all in one piece. And then also later on, you see where things would kind of maybe, okay, this would be a good transition. And also when Dave saw something, it would be like, oh no, this is a better transition. And then we would do that. So when I would kind of present it the first time, I would try where, this would be maybe a spot to kind of hit. And then also following the script. Sometimes you just want to do the script. And then if I had an alt, I would then kind of like, hey, what about this idea? So that's how I would approach it.
Yeah, same as well for me. But the only difference is, when the dailies are coming in, you have to cut what you've received. And then after you've gotten enough of it and you've got your show, now you can get creative on where to make those intercuts work best.
Yeah, I always cut to script first. And as you know, scenes come in a different order. So like James said, you cut what's given to you first. And I always keep to the script. And then generally speaking, I'll throw out some ideas. But once the director and then the producers and showrunner, in this case, Dave, starts working with us, then we collaborate to get to where those intercuts and stuff are.
I think we have a theme here. You take what you get and you give it your best.
Exactly.
Watching a Star Wars film or TV series, you're sort of hardwired to look for Easter eggs anyway, but pretty much you'd be looking for Star Wars Easter eggs. When I went back and watched the series for a second time, an Easter egg popped out at me that I never expected to see. What the hell were the Shawshank Redemption Easter eggs?
Oh, in episode 1?
So in episode 1, you have Clancy Brown, who played the sadistic guard Captain Hadley in Shawshank. He played Governor Azadi. And I caught that the first time because Clancy Brown's pretty easy to pick up. But if you go back and watch episode 1 again...
There's another Shawshank Redemption character.
Mark Ralston, who played the equally sadistic Shawshank inmate Boggs, he was Captain Hale. So of all the Easter eggs I would expect to find in a Star Wars project, Shawshank Redemption might have to be the absolute last.
That's hilarious.
Did you guys talk about that at all? Did Dave say anything about that, or did it just...
No.
My only Easter egg I brought up earlier, I'm like, hey, that was Kevin Kiner and James Wilcox. That was my only thing. That was separate. That was separate from the actual Star Wars universe.
Yeah, we never talked about it.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, working in Shawshank to a Star Wars show is quite a feat. So if you could talk to Dave and see if next season on Ahsoka you could double down and work in something from Green Mile, that would be awesome.
Done.
I still cannot get over that. A Shawshank Redemption Easter egg in Star Wars. Maybe that's just me, but I think it's pretty wild. I also think Dana, James, and Rosie are great editors and terrific guests to have on the show. I guess that is why they've been on now for a combined 11 times. As they say, you can never get enough of a good thing, so please join me in thanking the trio for joining us today. I look forward to having them back for a 12th time, if I can be so lucky. Luck is a good thing to have on your side when building a career in the editorial arts. But a better and much more dependable thing to have on your side is Avid Media Composer. It is the ultimate power in the post-production universe, especially if you get Media Composer Ultimate. But whether you go with Media Composer or Media Composer Ultimate or a monthly or an annual subscription, the important thing, young Padawan, is that you begin your journey with Avid as soon as you can. There is so much to be learned and so many great stories just waiting to be told. Well, that is going to do it for today, my friends. I think next week we're going to take a little break. So maybe use that time to go back into the Rough Cut archives and listen to an old episode you may have missed. And if you do the math, you can figure out that there are 7 episodes that feature today's guests. I recommend one of those. I recommend all of those. No matter what you decide to do over this little break, I look forward to catching up with you again soon. Until then, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.